Welcome. Thank you for joining me on the TFB podcast. This is episode 70-something. I don't even know. Today I have Michael Schmaeling. He is a guy who's located in northeast Pennsylvania at a place called Rodale Institute. And he got started beekeeping about 6 years ago, and he went from 20 colonies up to 200 in like 2 years. So, some opportunities to learn some methods, learn some ideas, hopefully, bring you out of your complacency that you might be in about what you can and can't do, because we have people out here who do some things that a lot of people think are impossible. So hang around for that. Coming right up. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Solomon.
So I think, was it Bruce Rodriguez suggested you as a guest?
Yeah, I think Bruce and Mitch.
Mitch, yep.
Yeah, they're both Berks County. I have bees in Berks County and Lehigh County and Monroe County, and those are kind of surrounding counties here. And I've gone to a couple of the meetings. And yeah, I've had Bruce in the bee yard, in the mating yard a couple of times, helping me catching queens.
Well, I've never spoken to you before today, so why don't you just kind of lay out like how you got into beekeeping and what all you do right now?
Well, what was it? So I started working on at the Institute, Rodale Institute. What was it, 6-7 years ago? And I had no prior beekeeping experience, but they had bees on the farm and they were keeping them in top bars. And I was a facilities foreman there at the time, and our executive director was kind of managing the bees that we did have on site. And I was kind of Johnny on the spot one day. There was a swarm in the tree, and he called me over and said, "Hey, go get a ladder and get a box and, come up here and catch this swarm." And I did, and I put them into a box, and I was kind of hooked, from that day. But at the time, we were also keeping bees in top bars, and we weren't having much success with that here in Northeast Pennsylvania. And plus, I think our bees back then, they were coming from a very conventional system. We were getting packages, and our survival rate was pretty poor. So I've only been keeping bees now for, 6 years, 5 years. And I kind of stuck with that. I kind of was poking around in the beehives there because I caught that swarm, and he said, this could be your colony and you could kind of watch over it. And I did, for the first year, and failed a lot but learned a lot. And we kind of, we kept doing that for a couple years. And then he kind of resigned from the Institute, and, we weren't having success. Our survival rate was like losing, 80 to 90% of our bees. We were only managing like 15 colonies in top bar hives. So it was the third year or second year that I was keeping bees, and I kind of didn't see it being very practical. I didn't enjoy it because it was just kind of tough keeping the bees on top bars and not getting them crossing over, cross-combing and destroying it. And then, the management it didn't seem very fun. So after he resigned, I just kind of seeked out a mentor, and I just started building all my own equipment. Langstroth equipment, and we got bees from Tim McFarlane in Vermont. We got bees from Kirk Webster, and I also had some like feral colonies that I had collected around here in Northeast Pennsylvania. And I kind of put honey production on the back burner, and I wanted to learn how to propagate bees. And we had 20 colonies going in Langstroth equipment. And I went up to Kirk Webster's 8-day workshop, queen rearing workshop, and I took that. And I came back to Rodale, and I just started raising some queens off of to propagate to make up for any of my losses. If I was going to manage 20, I thought, well, why not try putting 40 into winter, so I could have, if I lose half, then I have 20 coming out. So I actually did that. I stuck to that goal, and I had 21 colonies that came out of winter that year out of 40. So I was like really stoked about that. So we were going from like 88 to 90% loss to, we had 50% loss. And I really took it serious on, kind of like the breeding and raising queens and propagating the bees. And I took those 21 that I had come out of winter 2 years ago, and I turned it into 189. So by then, I kind of had somewhat of a mating yard set up, and I had a couple nuke yards, but I still wasn't putting any of them into honey production. I was just like strictly propagating the bees. So then I had 189 going into winter. Last year, and 153 came out. So we went from 80, 90% loss to 50% loss to, roughly, I don't know what the percentage of that would be, but that was like 20, 25, 30% loss last year. So then this year I focused a little bit more on propagating, but I also had some bees that I put into honey production. But I got the mating yard all really ramped up to what I want it to be. And right about now, going into winter, we have around 400 colonies. There's roughly around like 150 mating nukes, and then I'd have to say there's around 60 production colonies, and then the rest are all nukes. So, fingers crossed going into this year. But that's not all I do at for Rodale. I'm also a farm manager here in Emmaus, where the Rodale family first resided when they came from New York back in the 1930s. And this is kind of like where the organic movement started in North America back when JI started publishing, the gardening magazines and the prevention magazines, and just started talking about how soil health and organics agriculture is going to be it's all involves soil health. And I don't know if you guys are too familiar with Rodale Institute and what they actually do, but it's a research farm. It actually has the longest running trial on conventional versus organic grain and vegetable production.
Do you know any of the results of that?
Yeah, the organic always does better during droughts, and the yields are always the same. So when they say that, organic agriculture couldn't feed the world, we have the science, we have the research has been there. It's been there, since, was it in 1947? I think it is when they got the So they had this farm in the 1930s, and then they moved it to a bigger farm in Kutztown, that's where like the main farm is at, and that's 333 acres of certified organic land. But that's where all the research is held at. So and it's not like a little small trial, and that's been going on for 60 plus years, that research. And they're starting to look at the nutritional density in organic vegetables versus conventional vegetables. So, looking at the nutritional value of that too. And, obviously we all know as beekeepers that conventional agriculture is a big part of the bee problem as well. So
that's good information.
Oh yeah, the website, rhodeleinstitute.org. There's tons of information, and the farm's always open to the public. So
awesome. So you told me that you make pretty much all of your equipment except for frames.
Yeah, I source out the frames and foundation from Humble Abodes in Maine. But I build all the bottoms, boxes, and lids, and I use all rough cut. Well, it's planed on one side and it's rough cut on the other, but I use the rough cut pine for the inside of the hive, obviously. But all of it's kind of universal to my apiary, and just, I don't have like too many boxes of different sizes or, I use dividers too, a little piece of masonite to divide nucleus colonies. And also I run 4-way mating nukes. Like I just modified the Langstroth box to, one 10-frame Langstroths divided into 4 ways. And I build the baby frames too. I cut like my old frames in half and mill them down to make like the baby frame for the mating nukes.
So you use the quarter style with the half frames?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's a 4-way mating nuke. It's kind of like the same thing that Kirk uses, Kirk Webster. If you've ever seen his website, he has kind of like a design that he's modified those boxes to hold 4 colonies. But you got to modify the frames a little bit, just one side of them. And but I don't use I don't make feeders. I only use like a thin piece of masonite to divide the colonies, and they're easy to get in and get out, and they're pretty inexpensive as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think Kirk Webster's website is like kirkwebster.com or something like that. It's pretty easy to find.
Yeah, and those boxes, they're easy for me because if I ever need to get bees in those combs, like in spring, if with some of my dead outs, I could just take that drawn comb and put it on a nice strong colony in the spring, and just in a couple weeks I could go back to them and get some frames of brood and some frames of honey and pollen, and get the mating nuke, all my mating nukes back up and running. But they have been taking a little bit of a hit last year. It's just hard to get them to overwinter well on those little frames. But I'm trying new things. Like the loss wasn't substantial. I think I had around like what was it, like 40% loss, almost about half of them in the mating yard. But the nuke yards always come through strong with like over 90% survival rate in the nuke yards, but usually the colonies in 2 deeps are fall a little bit harder. Their percentages are losses are a little bit higher than that.
So with that rough cut lumber, is that still 3/4 inch or is that thicker?
Yeah, it's 7/8. It's just a little bit thicker, which it's not a lot, but I think it is if you just think about it, because like an 1/8 of an inch, just that 1/8 of an inch is just a little bit more. And I also use like solid bottom board, so there's rough cut on the bottoms too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really neat too, because I do have some Langstroth equipment that is planed on the inside, and there's like zero propolis on the walls. But when you look inside the rough cut lumber boxes, they're just really, really propolized. And just being up at like Apimondia and hearing Tom Seeley talk about that, he was encouraging, beekeepers to use like queen excluders or like propolis traps or catchers or something. But he was telling, the crowd to mount them on the interior of the hive so the bees will put propolis on it, just to have that, the benefit of how they do in nature, because if you look inside a cavity in a tree or something, the entire wall is just propolized, and it has a lot to do with, their health, and I feel.
What kind of joints do you use in your boxes?
It's just the rivet joints. So literally I just use a table saw and a miter saw with a dado blade. I put the dado blade on the table saw. So, you're just cutting 7/8 of an inch off you cut the side walls all to length. Well, obviously you got to rip them down, because they come in 1x12s. And then I think I get from the rip, I think it's a 1 inch and 5/8 rip comes off of that 9 and 9/16 width for the deeps. But with that rip that I ripped off, it's 1 and 5/8. That's what I use for my lids, for the rim that goes around the lids. Mm-hmm. And I use those for my bottoms too.
Okay.
So any of the scrap wood that's left over from the 1x12s usually ends up going on the top of my lids, or goes into for the bottoms. So like basically after I'm done building the boxes, I have like zero scrap except like just trash cans of sawdust.
Very nice.
Yeah, it is. I don't know. It's something. It's very satisfying. But I've had like carpentry skills my entire life. So like when I got into beekeeping, I'm like, oh, build a square box. Like I could easily do that. And it also gives me something to do, over winter, get ready for the next season.
I'm sure you can find a beneficial use for that sawdust as well.
Oh yeah, we either put it in the compost, or I could use some of it for the smoker, or I just don't chuck it. There's all kinds of bedding for the chickens. There's just numbers of stuff you can do with that. I'm not a hoarder, but if there's anything useful, I'll like hang on to it until I need it.
So you said you were at Apimondia. I've talked to a few people that were up there. Well, tell us about that. What'd you learn? What stood out to you?
Oh, well, the research and the scientists, they're all really focusing on just the resilience in the honeybee. And a lot of them are, looking at, the hygiene and just these traits that the bees have, and it's kind of like, they're saying that, the bees can survive without treatments, but there's like a breeding aspect kind of to it. So they're really talking about all that, and there's like a big movement on, the exposure to, herbicides, fungicides, and pesticides, and, how that's really hurting the bees' health. And, because a lot of these migratory beekeepers are taking their bees to these highly conventional areas to pollinate, conventional crops, and all their bees are, getting exposed to pesticides and herbicides and fungicides, and that's really creating a problem for the bees' health. And, to even see the movement with the treatment-free crowd, a whole day, a whole session was on treatment-free. That was, you don't get to see something like that very often, even, at any conferences, really, other than if the conferences or the conference is just kind of like the based on that, on that, because, everybody was there from all walks of the beekeeping world, the biggest conventional guys to the, probably the smallest treatment-free beekeepers. Seemed like everybody was there, but everybody's talks were really good. But I feel like, there's hope in the future. People are starting to realize that, the bees are very resilient, and we need them. And I feel like if we keep going down the same road we're going, it's going to be, it could get worse.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting that you mentioned the breeding aspect, because, I think you make a good example with your experience there. What we know doesn't work is just buying new bees and replacing them every year. From virtually everyone that I've ever talked to, just buying bees and replacing them every year is a good way to lose money. Right. But when you start introducing breeding from your own bees or catching swarms, which is in itself a sort of breeding, because you're introducing, what you're doing is you're multiplying the bees that are already surviving. By definition, breeding bees is done the year after they've survived once already. So they're already, one step up. And same with swarms. Swarms come from healthy hives that have already survived one winter. And, that's when I see people start to have a little bit more success, is when they start doing that. They're working with bees that are already a little bit better. I still hear people concerned about not getting good bees from swarms, and I'm just thinking, well, no, those are better bees than you're going to buy, unless you're buying already treatment-free bees, local treatment-free bees. So, I think that's a good example. The downfall, I think, is where people think that some sort of big university breeding program is necessary, and it's not really.
No, it's like, from my standpoint, when I was keeping bees, in those top bars, and it just wasn't practical to me. Like I said, I felt like I was damaging the bees, and I knew we were getting them from a highly conventional system. Like, after I learned, for the first couple years, I was like, these bees are not good bees. And they're, as a beekeeper, especially in the beginning stages, you start to learn. But in my eyes, I was like, I'd never want to have to buy bees again. So I'm going to learn how to propagate them from, the best that I got. And that was all very practical observations. Like, I didn't have to go count mites, or I wasn't weighing them or doing anything. These are just very practical observations of how these bees were doing. And I just started raising queens from the best of my best. But, now I only have, this year, I'm only selecting from about 6 or 7 different families to breed from. But, and some of my best stock, like my first cutout I ever did, I still carry that line from 6 years ago. It's not the same queen, but I got her daughter. But that, one of my best colonies my best queen lines came from a cutout that I did. But yeah, I think that is a big, it's not going to be like the, what do they call it? The silver bullet to solve all the problems, but especially for treatment-free beekeepers, if they're not treating their bees, but they have these bees that are surviving, like those bees are on the cutting edge of like, being able to survive with, like zero inputs of, chemical treatments or anything like that, or, brood breaks or whatever. So it's, I encourage people, like, we sell bees, we sell queens, but I'm not like, when people buy these bees, I'm like, well, you need to learn how to like make a split, or you need to learn how to like make a walk-away split, or come to me in the summer and I'll get you a couple queens so then you could split them, and then maybe next year maybe you could get introduced to like read a book over winter of like rearing queens, and then rear a few queens next year, or just try it out from like whichever colony, because I know there's beekeepers out there that just have these colonies that they love so much and they do so well and they produce a crop and they don't have to be treated and they survive, and then I'm like, well, you got something special there. Raise a couple daughters from her and make a couple little splits. But some of them get a little intimidated by that, or they think they're going to have like too many bees. But I always tell them it's better to put like double of what you started with, in spring into winter. So then if you lose some, you'll come out of winter with what you had the year before. So it's kind of like you're not having to go buy bees, but you just kind of, but you're not losing anything, I mean, yeah, you had 4, but you lost 2, but you still have 2, instead of just buying 2 and then having 2 die, and then they gotta like you're saying, go fork out, I've had guys, when I tell them how I've ramped up the apiary, I had this one gentleman come to me and he's like, Mike, you got to teach me how to do this. He's like, my wife is going to kill me if I have to buy bees next year. And I'm just like, oh, geez, don't get me in trouble, man.
I wish I could figure out the best way to teach people not to be intimidated, especially early on, because I still run into that. I mean, there's been... Well, there tends to be different seasons of types of questions on the Facebook group. So right now it's my bees are loaded down with mites and all my friends tell me I need to treat and it looks like they're dying and what do I do? Oh my God, my hive's going to die. It's that season right now.
Yeah.
And with the treatment-free beekeeping that we do, if you haven't done what you should have been doing back in the spring and summer, then by the time you get to this stage, I mean, the what to do question has already been decided. It's not, it's now right. Is when we let those hives die that aren't going to survive anyway. So, but I still run into questions a lot like, I'm too intimidated to go catch a swarm. What do I do? And I'm going, it's not that hard. It's actually kind of fun. And if you really can't, if you're really that afraid, or I don't even know if afraid's the right word. If you're that intimidated by catching a swarm, then maybe you don't need to be a beekeeper. Maybe you need to, in fact, I recommend everybody before they become a beekeeper, like go visit a beekeeper. Yeah. Go, I'm happy to have anyone here who wants to come visit. I get people down from Portland fairly regularly, people that want to check out my bees and whatnot, and I'm always happy to have them if you want to get into the hive. I mean, it's really beneficial, I think, to get into a hive before you get your own bees, and then you won't be intimidated because you know what it's like. It's much more difficult when you're starting cold turkey and, especially that package shows up in the mail or you get that first swarm call and you have no idea what you're doing. And so you have to go out and you have to go out and handle it, which is good for a learning experience, but it would be good if you already had some of that hands-on experience ahead of time.
Yeah. Well, that was like I seeked out a mentor, which is the best thing I ever did.
Yeah.
And I thought queen rearing was rocket science, but in fact,
really not.
It was the funnest thing I ever did, and it was nice to know. Where my queens were coming from and which line of, that I was breeding from, and just seeing how they did, going, into winter. And mind you, I don't feed the bees here either. I don't treat them and I don't feed them. So like I'm trying to wean out, even those ones that, are really light right now and producing a bunch of brood. I'm not even, feeding those guys anymore. But yeah, it's no one should be intimidated by raising their own queens. In fact, I think that would help out our bees a lot better, especially from the treatment-free community. If they started breeding some more of their bees and their queens, then that would, help. If they started throwing swarms, well, then, there's better genetics going out into, out there. But my biggest thing, though, too, was when I was raising these queens, I was like, I got to set up a mating yard, and I got to try to isolate the mating because I don't want my bees, these queens, flying over and mating with, some packages that came from, the South and from a highly conventional system. So I basically, where I have these 150, 200 mating nukes, there's about 40 production colonies surrounding the 40 acres, about 300 yards apart from each other in groups of two. And I give those bees unlimited brood space and or brood nest, and any of my dead outs from over winter, I will take the drone comb and put them in there. I'll give them at least 3 to 4 frames of, the majority of it will be drawn out drone comb, so that they'll get, a good population of drones saturating that area, because that's another thing with I guess you could say with the breeding aspect, is not all those traits carry over to that daughter you raised. I'm sure there's a percentage of, let's say you raised 100 queens from some line. I bet you, let's say maybe 30 of them, or who knows, maybe half of them may carry over those traits that you're, looking for. But
yeah, and that's why we need to be prepared for that. That every year, 10, 20, 25% normal loss. That's normal.
Yeah. Yeah, and oh gosh, what was I gonna say? Yeah, I'm not trying to have 100% of my colonies come out of winter. If I did, I wouldn't be able to really. It'd be a lot harder for me to select which ones to breed from, because if I had, all of them come out, then. But yeah, 20 to 30% is good. But I know guys who are in a conventional system who are losing like 50%. And they'll tell me, I still think you're treating, and I'm just like, I've never treated, and I don't. if I have to treat my bees, I'll quit beekeeping. Like seriously, I won't even. I'll pack up everything and and then sell it or store it or whatever, like I don't want to have to treat the bees, and that just doesn't seem fun to me as a beekeeper.
Yeah, I still get accused of lying. There's this one guy that keeps trying to. Anyway, he keeps after me, and he literally does not believe that I've kept bees for 16 years without treating.
Yeah,
I don't know. To keep up a lie for this long while maintaining this level of disclosure and, freely available evidence on the internet and podcasts and all the other stuff that I do. I mean, if you think after all of that I'm still lying, then I don't have anything for you, because there's nothing that'll convince you.
Right. Yeah. But I think there's a movement in the beekeeping communities, the treatment-free bees, beekeepers want those kind of bees, because even good beekeepers or beekeepers that have been keeping bees, longer than way longer than me, and maybe longer than you, that want these bees. They're like, they're kind of on the cutting edge. And I feel like there's people want to get ahead of that curve, and try to build a better bee. And it's the same thing with organic agriculture. Even the big companies, all have like an organic line now,
Well, it's profitable.
Right, it's profitable, but I think consumers are starting to, read the back of labels, and they want to know what's in there. And in fact, I had somebody ask me if I treat my bees and what's in the honey. Because I did produce. I produced. It was my first year. This was our first year actually putting some bees into honey production, and we did produce a little bit of a crop this season. And this lady was asking me if what kind of contaminants are in the honey, and if I treated them or if I fed them anything.
Legs and heads.
Yeah. But she was more. I think she was more worried about like. The chemicals or anything that was in it, or if I was feeding them sugar. And in fact, I was very proud to say, no, we don't. We don't feed the bees, and we don't treat them, and the honey's not heated and it's not filtered. So, it's not. It can't be. You can't certify honey, but in fact, I keep all the apiaries are all on. There's 6 different apiaries. They're all on certified organic land.
That's
so that
awesome.
Being at the Institute, I would never take the bees to a conventional farm, but I would take them to a rural area to a household or something, like that. But I would never, I don't want to put them right next to. I've had that experience where I set up a nuke yard one year, and that corn went to pollen. And my bees were just bringing it back by the boatloads. And I came back, and the bees looked really good a couple weeks before that. But when I came back, it looked like half the population was gone. But they had corn pollen just slammed in there. And I felt that the corn pollen was having traces of neonics in it. And they were feeding that to the larvae and the baby bees, and I felt like it compromised like half of the the colony, because when I came back, it seemed like the population was cut in half. And a lot of people would probably be like, "Oh, well, you had mites," and it's like, no. The bees looked really healthy. There was no signs of swarming. Like all the queens were accounted for. All of them were queen right, but it just seemed like the population was cut in half. And I tell you what, even that winter, I lost a lot of them in that bee yard, but I took them out, and I never brought them back there, because I feel like that corn pollen had something to something to do with it. Now there's all different kinds of corn pollen, or corn seed. Some's treated, some's not. Some sprayed, some isn't. Not all of them have the same practice, but I felt like that pollen in that field was no good for honeybees. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I had a nasty. It appeared to be a pesticide kill in my main yard at my dad's place this last year, and I lost my original stock that I'd maintained for 15 years. I had lost all the splits that I made that year. Everything was dead before. There was one hive still alive the 1st of December. Everything else was dead. There was honey on virtually every hive still. I don't know what happened, but now that I've bought a new place and I can keep bees on my own place, I'm gonna focus on keeping them here rather than there. I'm not gonna try and put anything back there again.
Yeah, it's just, I feel like some places it's just not, and where I'm at, it's big ag. There's a lot of corn and soy around. And like probably less than 1% of the Lehigh Valley where I'm at in Pennsylvania is less than 1% is managed organically. So it's kind of, you got to kind of like look for these honey holes or, find these kind of areas that your bees aren't going to get exposed to, sprays or anything like that. And plus, I don't know, always trying to look for the most healthiest, diverse diet for the honeybee. I think that has a lot to do with their survival too, is if they'll stay healthy if they got a good, diverse diet, a good floral kingdom to forage from, and not just like, those monofloral crops of just kind of like one big source of this and one big source of that. Like to have a good, diverse diet, I feel like that, especially coming from a treatment-free standpoint, is, we're already putting them up against all the vectors and pests and diseases. So it's like, having them have a good diet does play a big role, I feel.
How could farming of that scale be changed, I guess, sort of on the permaculture, the organic philosophy? How could it feasibly be done that way, on that scale, but without such huge monocultures?
It could get it, like they could farm organic, but it's just the same thing with beekeeping. These highly conventional systems, they're just afraid to take that step because they know they're going to lose, everything. So in agriculture, to like transition to organic, they got to come and do they got to analyze the soil, and they got to take that conventional field out of production. So it could take, multiple years until they could become, certified to grow organic, to have an organic production or organic system, because they can't just, you just can't turn that field into organic the next year. The soil still has residue, from all the herbicides and fungicides and pesticides and, so there's like a transition period. So it's like, it's just like in beekeeping with, beekeepers afraid to go completely treatment free. They're afraid, if they're going to go treatment free, well, they're going to lose all their bees. And it's like, yeah, well, you will. But you're only going to have a handful that survive, but that's the recovery right there. It's like about the collapse and recovery. but you're gonna, in the end result, you're gonna have a better product or a better bee, a healthier bee, a healthier soil, a healthier vegetable. Then you'll have a healthier person too, in the end. But there, like I said, there's a big curve. I feel like, because even at the Institute, we help farmers out from all over the country, or all over the world for that matter. And in fact, the second biggest landowner to Pennsylvania is coming to us because he wants to transition. He owns a lot of land around here, but he wants to start transitioning his land slowly to organic. And that's huge. But yeah, so it's the collapse and the recovery. Just like you could read that on Kirk Webster's website.
Mm-hmm. Why is he wanting to do that? Is it just a doing the better thing, or is it profitable? What's his idea?
It's probably a little bit of both. It's profitable, and it is a better thing. But that's where we step in, to help out or get people to transition that and help them get these certifications, and that helps. The future of organic is that once they kind of get those fields and commit that land to transition to organic, there's probably a very slim chance that will ever, hopefully it will never go back to a conventional system. So it's just, it's both though. But the organic market is becoming as competitive as, the prices I feel are dropping for organic, produce and organic products. It's getting very competitive these days. That's what everybody used to complain about as well. Oh, I can't eat organic because it's just so expensive. But at the same time, they could be spending their money on a lot. They're probably spending their money on other things that are probably not very helpful to them too. But it's like, so. We eat, like, all of our, fridge is filled up with organic produce, and plus we grow a lot of stuff here on the farm. But it's easily doable, especially if you just budget right. But the organic market is definitely getting very competitive with your conventional produce.
Do you see? We've seen this year at Epimondia, they had a whole day of treatment-free stuff. Are you seeing in your area a shift toward different ideas, or is there still a lot of different areas around the country that I've visited? There's different levels. At some clubs, they invite me as, like, I don't know, the loyal opposition or something. In other clubs, they invite me as just like, this is what we do, and you're the guy that talks about it. So what's happening there?
Well, considering, I've kept my head down for quite a while, and I just stuck to my bees, and I really wasn't doing anything outside of, I wasn't socializing with anybody. I wasn't going to club meetings. I wasn't really going to the internet, and I just really worked on my bees, and I got the 20 to 400 in just 2 years, and my survival rates were like just dropping tremendously. And then I kind of shook up a lot of the people around here, and they were kind of like, whoa, who's this guy? He's just been keeping bees for a couple of years. He got 400 colonies and he's not treating them. And I was getting a little bit of grief here and there, but, and I invited, I was just like, hey, if you don't believe it, come out to the bee yard. I'll show you. I'll show you bird patterns. I'll let you hold a frame. You could look at look at larvae and everything. And, but it started becoming, it's there is a movement around here for treatment free, and it's a close community. There's a few guys, but there's a lot of conventional beekeepers around here too. But it's kind of funny. I was getting some calls. Well, I wouldn't say it was funny, but I was getting some calls from, some people that I knew came from a highly conventional system coming to me for queens. And I was kind of, surprised, but also I wanted, to help them. And, but you start hearing this thing where it's like, you got these beekeepers that treat regardless of mite levels. They just do it on a calendar date. Like, I'm going to treat on, August 25th, and I'm going to treat on September 15th and October 1st. Like, those are my days to treat or whatever. But it's nice to hear people say, I'm not going to treat if I don't have to or something, so it's like kind of, people are like, it seems like kind of like that old beekeeping's kind of like going in a downward spiral. So it's kind of, it's good to hear that. But, there's guys like Bruce and Mitch and I know a couple more, Jake and Aaron. So there's a little bit of a small community of guys, and so I feel like, there is a movement, but I tell you this, I went to a beekeeping meeting when I first started beekeeping, and the one guy was yelling across the room to another guy, calling him an idiot for I forget. I guess he sprayed oxalic acid on the brood nest or did something like with a treatment, and they were going back and forth, and I was just kind of like, oh man, if I say to anybody that I don't treat, like, I'm going to be chased out of here. So, but that was like the last time I ever went to one. But, now that I'm having some success and, it's a lot easier to go into beekeeping meetings and I don't know, like I want to be out there to I don't tell anybody how to keep their bees. I tell them how I do it. But that was the whole thing though too, is when I wanted to get the apiary up to this kind of scale, my whole goal is to build a foundation for, possible research for the future. And have this kind of, treatment-free beekeeping at a commercial scale or small commercial scale, and have some research done on it, and have it be successful, and then do some research on it and be able to explain why it works, and why it's, why the bees are surviving. Because there's probably there's a million reasons why the bees are dying, but I bet you there's only like a handful of reasons as to why they're surviving. So, but I feel like the same thing with organic agriculture. I think, more people are getting into, I wish more people would get into raising queens, but I feel like that's getting, that's coming up there too, is that people are, interested in that, because they have these colonies that they really like and want to do something with them, instead of just like taking their honey from them or something, Mm-hmm. But that was the thing though, is for people for raising queens is, somebody could tell you how to do it, but they can't tell you when to, and that's like what people got to learn for their location is, when's the earliest they could start raising queens, or when's the latest they could start raising queens, or when's the best time to make splits, and when their honey flows start and when their honey flows stop. And, that plays a big role. And that's one thing I found with beekeeping was that I was so in tune with nature, and when the flowers were going to bloom or when they bloom last year as to when they're blooming this year. And like, there's no set calendar date for like my raising queens. It's always like I'm watching, when those colonies start making queen cups, or when the brood starts hatching, and when it becomes sexually mature enough to raise queens. And, when I see my first swarm cell or something like that, and take notes on that, and, how late did a colony go to swarm, and et cetera. But it's all very practical stuff.
Yeah, and I think I encounter a lot of people who try something like queen rearing, or try something, and there are many different methods for queen rearing, but just say grafting. And it didn't work the first time, and they gave it up, or they're discouraged. And I'm just trying to tell people, like, these methods were developed by people who are doing the exact same thing you are, and they didn't have much to work with when they started, and now you have at least an example of what to work with when you're starting. So try to do, if you just stick with it, if you just keep going, it will teach you. You will find things that work and that don't work. And if you keep studying, you'll find methods, things that people suggest that work and don't work. And the important fact is that all beekeeping is local. Some things that work really well for somebody somewhere else are not going to work very well for you. And unless you have a local experienced person to learn from, which not all of us have, you're not going to figure those things out until you try it. And the same with any other method, really. Just keep trying it. It's not about having bees. It's about keeping bees. And it's so often I run into people who just want to have them. And I hate the term bee haver, but they want to get their thing right, and they just want it to be there. And I look at it like other hobbies. One of the hobbies that I'm into is model airplanes. And I'm not really interested in having model airplanes, right? I want to take them out and fly them. And I'm really, of all the things that I'm really good at in this world, flying model airplanes I'm not good at it. It's especially flying line of sight, because you get turned around and now your controls are backwards from what you're looking at for your airplane, and it doesn't work right, and then you crash. So I crash a lot. But it will teach you. You will learn. And so instead of buying some big fancy expensive model, which is really takes a long time to build and costs a lot of money, and then I'm just going to take that out and crash it, that's not a recipe for success. That's just going to make me discouraged, right? So what I try to do is build very cheap things out of stuff like foam board and extruded polystyrene board that you get at Lowe's or Home Depot. Really cheap materials that are really durable, and so I can go out and crash and either fix the plane and fly it again, or it only costs a few bucks, so it's not that big a deal if I crash it. And so that's the methods that I try to teach to beekeepers, which is why I tell people to catch swarms as much as possible and to split your own bees as much as possible, because there's a huge difference in catching a swarm, which is basically free, and buying a package or a nuke, which is going to cost you $150 or $200.
Right.
And so when you lose that, it's really going to hurt. Right. And I want people to understand that it's not failure when things crash. It's part of the process. And so set yourself up to not be hurt by that crash, rather than setting yourself up for failure by buying a hot rod, a pedigree commercial beeline or something, which is not designed to do what you want to do, and not going to teach you, because it's going to crash on you.
Yeah. Hey, the first time I grafted eggs, and I didn't get Yeah, I didn't get any acceptance, and I was just like, what is going on here, and I I did it again, but I didn't like graft eggs that time. I grafted like maybe, let's say, larva that was too big, and that didn't work so well, but because they looked like queen cells, but they weren't. I just feel like there was something really wrong with them. But yeah, so you gotta crawl before you walk, but that's all part of the process until you get, you'll get really good at it. But heck, people don't even need to graft. They could do, like, let's say maybe a walkaway split or, stuff like that to start off with. And that's what I'm always, trying to tell people, that like if they come to me for bees, I don't want to. I try to tell them that, well, like, okay, this is a 10 frame nuke. It's gonna get really big really quickly. So, maybe think about propagating them, making a split or two, so then you get more bees going into winter. So you just don't have this one. So you're not coming back to me next year saying like, oh, I need more bees, because I don't want to see, I don't want to see people spending their money. You could go broke. And that was my big thing too, is I didn't want to have to use any inputs on my bees. I didn't want to have to feed them. I didn't want to treat them. And I looked at beekeeping catalogs, and I looked at the price of equipment, and I was like, it was just, for a hive setup, you're looking at $500. Well, I could build 100 deeps, or I don't know how. I could probably build like 100, for $500. I could build 2 deeps for $16, and that's coming from a 1 by 12 by 14 foot board. And that's, I think they're roughly around like $14 to $16. I'm getting 2 deeps for $16 to build, and it doesn't take
deal.
Yeah, it's a really good deal. But I was just like, I don't ever want to have to buy equipment. I want to build it, because it's just so much cheaper. And I've helped out a lot of guys and girls, and learn how to build their own equipment. Because I just, I showed them how easy it is, and then they're like, whoa, this is, anybody could do this. And
do you maintain the inner dimension or the outer dimension with your 7/8 inch wood?
You mean for like how the standard Langstroth?
If you were to stack a store-bought Langstroth on top of there, is your box wider? Is it the same inner dimension, or is it the same outer dimension?
Oh gosh, if it is, it's the same inner dimension, but it could be a little bit it's only like an 1/8 of an inch or a 1/16 of an inch kind of difference. But yeah, even with the rough cut wood, you still have some, there's like bellies on it. So some of it even goes above, thicker than 7/8.
Really?
So so you may see, in some places there could be a little bit of a gap, but not like nothing. That would be like anything really noticeable. But if you're trying to be like a perfectionist, I'm not going for aesthetics when I'm building the equipment, because I know the bees are going to pack that thing with that crack with propolis, or anything like that. But all the equipment should last me decades, as to for how it's built, and I feel like the bees really like that rough cut interior. It's just the amount of propolis. I actually have a photo on my phone of the propolis that's on the inside of the rough cut versus the propolis that's on the planed inner interior. But yeah, and Tom Seeley talked about how that the microbiology inside those hives is super important to the bees' health. And I can't believe people radiate those hives. to kill off any of the, anything that's in it.
Well, that is sort of the medical mindset. If you can kill off everything, but at the same time, people seem to be having more allergies than ever before. More food intolerances. Lots of stuff that's very much higher than it has been in the past.
Yeah, but it's like I think there's a podcast from. Oh man, my wife was talking about it the other night. I think it's Rick Bush, yeah. But they're talking about the microbiome in people's bodies and how that a lot of the conventional foods and the pesticides and stuff that they're using on it, it's just really, creating a lot of these issues in human health. And it's just, it's kind of crazy, that medical mindset of even beekeeping or, even the farming aspect of it all. It's tough, but I feel like, every day, even, at the Institute, there's a lot of inspiration there. And I get to see a lot of the big stuff that's happening on the inside of that, so it's really, I'm really happy and proud to be a part of that. And even being like a treatment-free beekeeper, it's an unprecedented practice. And we all get looked at as like mite bombs and, but, we're all very, proud of our bees and, having them surviving without treatments is, you got to have a lot of guts to not treat your bees, I guess. And because I get looked at like I'm kind of crazy sometimes because I don't treat or I'm not counting mites. And that's like the norm is, well, you should be treating and you should be counting mites. And I'm like, well, if I treated and counted mites in 400 colonies, I'd have no time to raise my queens. I'd have no time to catch my queens. I'd have no time to split my colonies, and I would have I wouldn't have any time. I'd be sitting in, a dark room with a light under, like with a microscope or a magnifying glass, counting mites. And that doesn't seem like a lot of fun as a beekeeper. I like spending more time with my bees and, and a lot of people would say that, well, you're manipulating them. That's why they're successful. But there's like, the only manipulation I'm doing is taking a colony and having it raise queen cells. And then the mating nukes basically get the only brood break out of any of the colonies in the apiaries because I do 4 cycles of queens during a season. So it takes me 20 days to raise a batch of cells. So before my cells are ready to hatch, I will catch the queens out of the mating nukes. And then the next day I will put a cell back into them. So they're the ones who get a brood break, until that queen starts mating or, has a mating flight and successfully mates, which is usually around like day either 9, 10, or 11. Sometimes even later than that. But I catch them on about day 18. But that's, the mating nukes are the only ones that really get manipulated in any kind of like fashion.
I feel like people that are raising that objection are really just looking for an equivalent to the treatment that they're doing. And so they misinterpret what we do in queen rearing and splitting and whatnot. The way that I do it with using the Ben Harden method of queen rearing, there's no hive gets a brood break except for the newly created nukes, which are waiting for their queen cell to hatch out and mate and start laying eggs. There's nobody gets a brood break.
Right.
Whatever management I do, I have very low swarming. Just nobody gets a brood break. So that's not part of the equation for me.
Yeah.
And, so people talk about, you can do it, but you have to have small hives. Well, I keep very large hives. I've got in my front yard right now, I've got 3 hives that are like the equivalent of 5 deeps tall.
Nice.
And that's big. That's not a small hive. They have unlimited brood nest. There's, so it seems like every objection people raise, I'm going, yeah, but I don't do that. That doesn't happen here. The thing you think is the solution isn't the solution. And a lot of people will latch on, like the on-the-spot queen rearing method requires a brood break. Well, if you do that every year, now your brood breaks work. They help to deal with mites, but a brood break requires work, on your part if you're causing it.
Right.
And you're creating bees, you're breeding for bees, you're selecting for bees that require an artificial brood break to survive. And I don't want that. I hurt myself this summer and have been unable to do much with the bees at all. If something was required for them to survive, if there's an input from me that was required for them to survive, they'd be up a creek because I currently can't lift anything.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you should be out there counting the mites.
Right. I can't pick up a box and take a hive apart to do a mite count if I wanted to.
Right.
But fortunately, I don't need to. And what's the point? I'm not going to do anything about it anyway. And to be totally honest, why would I treat? I don't need to. There's nothing happening here that I don't like. There's nothing happening here that I'm objecting to that's causing a crimp in my beekeeping style. Everything is working exactly as it's supposed to work. And, losing hives is normal. It's life. It's not normal if you're not losing hives. You should be losing some every year. John Keefus, who is also at Epimondia, talks about he actually tries to bring in mites so that he can maintain selective pressure against mites.
Well, that's the thing too, is even in my bee yards, I'll be really honest too. So I had one colony crash, coming out of winter. This year I had one that had a colony collapse. There was brood stores, and the brood pattern looked good. I didn't see any signs of mites, but there was no bees in the box. And just recently, I had another colony that has some pressure, but if they're gonna crash, I'm not gonna some beekeepers will take those colonies and take them to some they call it the sick yard or something, where they take the bees that have high mite pressure, but they just put them all into one bee yard, and I'm just no, I'm not going to do that. I want them to crash here, and I want those bees to I want robbers to come in and let's see what happens, and it's very delicate too. Insects are very, sensitive, and they're also very resilient too. And that's where I want to put them up against, the worst of the worst. I'm not gonna be taking frames of mite infested brood and putting it into a colony. But if a colony is gonna crash, I'm gonna let it crash where it's sitting right there, and I'm not gonna take it to some sick bee yard where I bring all my sick bees and let them crash there. And no, so I'm right there with you. I'm just and John. But that's his name, right? John
Keefus?
Yeah. Oh, that was the first time I ever heard about him. But he was great. He actually, all the talks were very serious. I felt in some ways, but his was cracking me up, and I just loved his whole presentation and his whole philosophy on beekeeping. And it's spot on,
And he was doing it over 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing with like some of these guys, these old guys who've just been doing it for, so long, keeping bees without treatments and doing it successfully. Like, they'll tell you that we could have fixed the mite problem 5 times already if, there wasn't synthetic or organic. Because I'm even, there's organic treatments, and people were asking me at the Institute, well, Mike, why aren't we using organic treatments? And I'm like, because they're still harsh. I'm like, people say they're soft, and there's formic acid in honey and yada, yada, yada. And I'm just like, they're just still super strong. And I don't ever want to resort to, having to treat our bees. I said, our bees will be so much ahead of the curve in the future that, these, people, this is like, I feel like, not treating your bees is the future of beekeeping, but I don't think that will ever happen, because it just seems like, the big ag and that whole industrial agricultural system, is just the pesticide applicators and the fungicide, and herbicide applicators. It's just, they don't call them treatments. They should call them pesticides and not treatments, because it is a miticide, it's a pesticide is what they're using, but they just use the term treatment so it doesn't sound as bad. But it is a pesticide that they're using on the bees, but it's just not at such a high level to kill the bee. But it could contaminate the honey and kill the brood. And
you're using a chemical that kills things. You're just using it at a low enough level that it doesn't kill the bees and it does kill the mites. I mean, any of the treatments that you use, if you jack up the application rate, you will kill the bees also.
Yeah, and if you're downwind of it, I don't know, you might wake up, in the hospital somewhere or something, or
that's what Keith has talked about with Kumafos. It's a nasty, nasty chemical. Fortunately, it doesn't work anymore and people don't use it so much anymore. But it is a nasty chemical that has killed many people over the years.
Yeah.
Due to inhalation or whatever. I don't even know, but it still kills even today. It's still used as a pesticide, and it still kills a dozen or 2 people a year.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I didn't know that. That's even beekeepers are you saying?
Not beekeepers. I think beekeepers typically use a lower dosage and an application method that isn't particularly toxic, especially when you use proper protective equipment. But when you're applying, I think it's still used a lot over in Eastern Europe and Turkey and that area. And so when you're dealing with a lot of it, when you're fumigating a field or something, there's a much more opportunity to get messed up by something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, was it Les Crowder, I think, was talking about treating bees way back in the day, and he got dosed with something. Those older guys that had to deal with that stuff, it's not good stuff. And we could have cleaned it up. We could have fixed it. But I actually do think the future of beekeeping is treatment-free beekeeping, because I think there's going to come a point where major portions of the backyard beekeepers and even sort of the smaller commercial beekeepers in the range of yourself there's just getting to be so many of them. And the thing with the so-called science around it is the science is looking for the science that we have now is in a context. It's asking questions like, does this treatment work? Does this treatment work better than that treatment? There's nobody asking the question, what do we have? How do we form a program by which we have bees that survive long term without treatments? Nobody's asking that question. So that's why I've been pretty disgusted with most of the studies that have been done, because they're not asking the right questions. They're not looking for the right things. None of them can explain why I can do and why you can do what we do. they just tell us that we can't. And so we hear that we can't, and it's like, well, what do I have to listen to you at all? You don't fit with the reality that I see in front of me. So of what good are you?
Right. Well, they say that the amatraz is the mites are becoming resistant to some of the treatments.
Yep.
You know, and that's the same thing that the herbicides are doing. And now people are making like cocktails up to kill these weeds that are growing in their fields. And that's the same thing. I feel like it's going to happen with beekeeping. But you know, the scientists and researchers, I feel like. You know, they, like you're saying, it's they're not really focusing on some of the, you know, the really, I think, big picture stuff. They're, you know, or they're not really, coming from a research institute, you know, the farmers and the researchers have to work very closely together because, you know, the researcher is not the farmer. You know, they're the scientist. You know, and the farmer knows, you know, what's going on, and they know, you know, if something's going to work or something's not going to work. And I feel like when I see some of the research that's out there too, I see that, and I see researchers trying to be beekeepers or, you know, vice versa. And I don't think it really works that way, you know, because anybody could go get some packages of bees and put them in the box and start collecting data on them and say, you know, these are our numbers.
And most of them start with packages of bees.
Right.
You know, they're doing the exact thing that I tell people not to do. Can we have a study? Can we please have a study that starts with an existing population of bees like yours?
Yep.
Somebody just take, okay, you've got 200 hives. I'm going to take your 200 hives that are already working, and I'm going to do studies on those rather than they always want to start with packages, which just handicaps you from the word go.
Right. And you get a grant that's only, you know, there's
2 years tops.
2 years. And by the time that person could even get the bees like established, you know, the research is over and they pull the plug and boom, you know, it's like, well, okay, you know, that's like, and I don't want to do that. So that's why, you know, when people come to me and they're like, well, you know, you got all these bees and, you know, you don't have any reasons why they're surviving. Well, I know why they're surviving, but then they'll be like, well, where's your data? And it's like, I don't want to get into that, you know, back and forth. It's like, you know, let's just, you know, we'll have it there for the future. And like I said earlier, I feel like everybody's looking at, you know, all the reasons as to why the bees are dying, and nobody's really like, you know, looking at, you know, there's only a handful of reasons as to why they're surviving. And I think it has a lot to do with like management and the breeding part. But,
are you involved with Robin Underwood's research at all?
No, she worked with us, when I just even first started beekeeping, and we were doing a side-by-side comparison of conventional versus organic, and we had a grant. The Institute put some money down for the grant, and I think the University of Maryland did as well, and I think it was a SARE grant, but that was only for a couple years, and that's where I got exposed to the treatments on bees, and because we had to take and put treatments on these conventional colonies and even use acids for the organic colonies. And I was just like, I will, you know, like with my bees, I'll never do this. I'd never put this stuff on them, because even in opening up that treatment in outside, it was still like this, you know, just super, super powerful. And I was like, I couldn't believe that the USDA would allow those treatments to even be considered organic. And that we're just talking about the organic ones. I was just like, wow, formic acid. Wow, it's like really toxic. They're just really powerful stuff.
Yeah, I don't want any of that on me.
Yeah. So, but that was, you know, part of the research that we had done. there. But, that data came back inconclusive. And then she went and got a grant, I think, through Penn State, and I don't know who else.
Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, she's doing a project right now comparing conventional to organic to treatment-free, or I think she's calling it chemical-free, but whatever.
Chemical-free.
And I hope it shows something useful. I hope it goes long-term. We'll see. But I've told her, it's like, I hope this shows something useful, but if you're going to try and tell me that what I do doesn't work, then it's not going to be of any use, because it does work. I was there. I've seen it. I'm doing it right now. Yeah.
Well, anybody like that, that says it doesn't work, I invite them to the bee yard, and I'm like, well, I'll show you everything. Like, I had an open house, and it was a field day at the Institute, and all of our work gets shown all day. So, like, I think it's open to the public. But, I think we had over 300 or 400 people that went to the Institute this year. And, I was going through all the hives. I had mating nukes there. I had 5-frame nukes. I had 10-frame nukes. And I had honey-producing colonies. And I showed them each stage that the bees go through. This is a mating nuke. This is where the queen cells go. And then once the queen's caught, she goes into a colony of this size, and they're in 5 frames. They're in a 10-frame box divided into 5-frame colonies. And then, what I do is I tell them how, each one competes for that box. So only the best one gets to keep the box, et cetera, and then they get moved to a 10-frame box, and then they get into, the following year they could end up being, put into the honey yard, or they could be looked at as a potential breeder for the future, or whichever. But I had a lot of people that would just, couldn't believe that. They're just like, wow, this brood, your brood looks amazing, and you don't treat. Are you sure you don't treat? And I'm just like, no. And that's another thing too is, the Institute's all about education and outreach, and even helping, farmers or beekeepers or, people in livestock, because we have a little bit of everything, at Rodale, of, everything that involves like agriculture, like even composting. We have composting classes. So, educating people is a big part of what we do. I've had, so many different, educational pieces this year, from veterans to, students from the Delaware Valley University, to just interns that come from, across the world, to come there for an internship. Like, I don't have any internships there yet for my department and the bees. Literally, the bees are almost like kind of funding themselves right now. But, I want, for the future of the bees there at the Institute, I really, if I was able to turn these 20 colonies into 400 in just a couple years, I give it a couple more years, and I'm going to try to, I keep setting goals for myself, and I keep looking at 1,000, and I'm just like, Mike, you're really gonna create a monster, and it's really doable with the management and the propagating. But I want to get there because I want it to be known that you could keep bees without treating. And it's not what you think it is. It's not like some crazy manipulations that you got to go out and do every day. It's very low maintenance. Beekeeping. It's very practical. It's a lot more fun to raise your queens and make some splits and make up for your losses. If you lose some, it's easy to bounce back. And, that you're just, you see the bees getting better each year too, and just healthier. And, and that has a lot to do with trying to isolate the mating. But there is some of those bad bees trickling in sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
But it's just let's make beekeeping fun again and not a science project. It's not rocket science to raise your own queens or make some splits or just build a swarm trap and bait it. Bruce Rodriguez could help. I'm sure he has a ton of ways to do it. He busted my butt a little bit when he came to the bee yard and he saw my swarm trap. He's like, "Is that your swarm trap?" And he laughed, and I was like, but when you have a lot of bees, you're not really you're not looking for swarms so much. But if there's one that's low enough, I'll always catch it. But I'm not chasing them up in the trees anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But
I guess I've been going for about an hour and a half now. That's longer than usual, but I'll let you get to the rest of your evening. Is there anything you think we should know before we close it down?
No, I just, appreciate anybody's time that goes and, listens to this. And I appreciate you Solomon, for seeking me out. And I would like to be as helpful as I can to anybody out there that would be interested in, I actually have something written up about how to raise queens, and it's in layman's terms. It's a 20-day method, very practical. And also, building equipment. I want to get some, I'm working with the development team there, and we'd like to get some, for the hobbyists or whomever, but just quick little videos on how to, build your own equipment at home with minimal stuff. But yeah. No, and thank you so much for bringing this community together, Solomon. It's a big thing. It's a big movement, I feel like, and very proud to be in this community.
Awesome. Is there any way? How would you like people to get a hold of you?
Oh, well, I have an email address. It's Michael.Schmaeling. I'm sure you'll have my name on the podcast, but it's michael.schmaeling@rodaleinstitute.org. I'm also on Facebook too, if anybody wants to add me or chat that way, or even like you're saying, well, we went over an hour and a half here, but yeah, you get me talking about bees, we could probably be here for the rest of the night.
Well, I'm not complaining, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, no, it is 10:30 here, and I do got to get up in the morning and actually do a few things, but no, yeah, I'm out there a little bit. I'm on Facebook, and that is my email address, and you could also check out rodaleinstitute.org and check out the website, and check us out, and yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for staying up so late tonight and recording this podcast with me. It's been a joy to have you on.
Thank you, Solomon. I really appreciate it.
All right, that was Michael Schmaeling. Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. It's been great to have you. If you'd like to support the podcast, I have a Patreon page. It's patreon.com/TFB. And I have just added some merch. I have a little merch store at parkerbees.myshopify.com. And if you are a patron at anything above $1, if you're in at $1, great, you get whatever I post on the patron page, some extras. But above that, you start to get free stuff. Start out at a sticker, then a patch, and maybe a t-shirt at some point. And I think at $5 to start, you get a pretty hefty discount on the merch store. So have that up now. We also have a Facebook page. You can search for Treatment Free Beekeepers on Facebook. I've got tfbforum.com if you like forums rather than Facebook. And there's also a YouTube channel. Basically, search around the internet for anything treatment-free beekeeping, treatment-free beekeepers, and most of it is associated with what we do. The Facebook is the main thing. We've got about 33,000 people on there now. So if you're listening to the podcast and you're not involved with that and you'd like to be, go check that out. It's a protected space for treatment-free beekeepers, so you don't have to be bombarded all the time by demands that you treat or suggestions that you should treat your bees. So we can basically mostly just get back to beekeeping and hopefully not have to count mites too much. So that's what I do. That's what I do for you all in this podcast. And if you'd like to support that, please do so on Patreon. I really appreciate it. Helps pay bills and stuff. I've got things to pay here. So that's it for today. Thanks for joining me, and hang around for the next episode.